Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Dan Pugh.
And I'm Shauna Harrison. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. Welcome to another Quick Quips episode, where we look at phrases that, for whatever reason, didn't fit into our regular format. Today, we're visiting the quick and the dead.
And special thanks to Dustin from the Sandman Stories Presents podcast for recommending this one.
According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, the quick and the dead means, quote, living people and dead people, end quote.
Okay, well, that's anticlimactic.
Yeah, so exciting. Today, we're familiar with the word quick, meaning that something happens in a short amount of time or that a person or object moves rapidly. However, Oxford English Dictionary provides two Old English entries for the word quick, which include, quote, living, endowed with life, animate, and to give or restore vigor to, end quote. So there are references to this version that some people may have heard without realizing it. To quicken something can mean to give it life or invigorate it. When babies were born and took their first breath, it was called quickening. One early usage is found in the 1385 Wycliffe Bible. I'll be reading this excerpt with words updated to their modern form. Quote, and they shall give reason to him that is ready to deem the quick and the dead, end quote. This interprets to something more like they will give account to him who is ready to judge the quick and the dead.
Well, I do remember growing up in a Protestant church. They used a version of what's known as the Apostles' Creed, and that was the first time I really heard the phrase "quick and the dead," because they used that phrase in the Apostles' Creed, or at least in that version of it. Some of them say the living and the dead, and in that one they are referring to living and the dead. This we shall come to judge the living and the dead. So it's really interesting how you see that, right? And so I know that's exactly what we run into in those older texts. You know, they're not talking about speed. They're talking about the living and the dead. And so that was my first introduction to it, is that Apostles' Creed piece. So I thought that was interesting from a relatively young age, trying to understand what that was all about. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever figured it out as a teenager, because back in those days, if I needed to learn something and no one was around to tell me, I would ride my bicycle a couple of miles to the library and be able to look things up there to figure out what something meant, and then ride my bicycle back home having learned about it. So There were just some things back in those days where you were just like, well, I don't know, and ain't that a shame?
I think I figured out quickening from the TV show Highlander. Which is kind of disturbing. But that's when they would like transfer their life force after they killed the other one. Was called the quickening.
Okay, yeah, well, because there can be only one.
Because there can be only one. Yeah, so anyway. So the phrase didn't need to really change meaning to find new uses. By the late 1800s, it was recognizable enough to be borrowed as a title, reference, or allusion in discussions. The cartoon Between the Quick and the Dead is found in the magazine Punch, volume 99, which was published November 22nd, 1890.
Punch was a satirical magazine. We have referenced it on the show before.
Yes, we have. The cartoon depicts a British officer employing the figure of justice beside the graves of the Army officer Edmund Musgrave Bartlett and the naturalist James Sligo Jameson over their roles in the Emin Pasha relief expedition. So in this case, the phrase was used as the title of a social commentary cartoon. And we're going to discuss this a little bit further in our behind the scenes video, which airs every Friday on Patreon. That's at patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. Even today, the quick and the dead is usually understood to mean living people and dead people. However, the phrase has been applied in a variety of figurative uses, sometimes representing broader contrasts, such as between vitality and lifelessness, action and passivity, relevance and irrelevance. The phrase appears in the March 21st, 1936 edition of the Washington Daily News out of Washington, D.C. We're looking at the article by Robert D. Potter titled "The Man on the Street. He's usually the one to suffer in accidents involving autos." Quote, "The coming of the auto has divided pedestrians into two groups, the quick and the dead. And it does a dead man little good to know that he had the right of way. Last year, nearly half of all motor vehicle fatalities were pedestrians, the man on the street. For centuries, a man that walked had the right of way over all forms of transportation. But recently, only 4 out of 30 large cities queried admitted the pedestrian had this right over motor cars at all times and places. End quote. Well, next up, we'll look at just how the phrase is used today. But first, a quick thank you, the rapid version, and an announcement for anyone who doesn't follow us on Patreon.
That's right, Shauna. We recently announced on our Patreon that episode 325 will be the final episode of Bunny Trails.
It's been a wonderful run, but as they say, all good things must come to an end.
These 9 seasons have been brought to you by our amazing patrons on Patreon.
Thanks to everyone who has supported the show over the years, including Heather, Dustin, Cheryl, Ad Skeptic, Charlie, Jill, Erica, Chris, Alan, Donna, and Ernest. Plus, special thanks to some of our higher tiers, including Jan and Emily, as well as Pat Rowe and JGP. And of course, thank you to our top spot, Mary Halsig Lopez.
You can find tons of content from the show's 9 seasons on Patreon at patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. We also have links to the episodes and transcripts or show notes for each episode on our forever home, bunnytrailspod.com.
The 1995 movie The Quick and the Dead was directed by Sam Raimi and featured Sharon Stone, Gene Hackman, Russell Crowe, and Leonardo DiCaprio. So a bit of a star-studded cast for the time. This movie uses the phrase in a literal and figurative sense. The movie is considered a non-traditional Western. The title implies that one is either quick, on the draw, or dead. Here is the synopsis as shared on Rotten Tomatoes. Quote, a mysterious woman gunslinger, Ellen, saunters into the town of Redemption looking for revenge. Her father was killed by the town's sadistic mayor, Herod, who is in the midst of organizing a quick draw tournament. The lady enters, joining a cast of miscreants and outlaws for a brutal competition in which the loser dies. Among the competitors is the Kid, an upstart who has his own score to settle with Herod. End quote. The Quick and the Dead is a high-quality reproduction Gishli print of Gene Hackman as the lead villain John Herod from the movie, and this is from an original painting for sale by the artist listed under Frolic Art Studio. And this is a neat recreation. It's colorful, it's got a cartoon style. It's not simply like a copy of a paused screen or something, and I enjoy the vibe of this one.
Yeah, looking at it, I'm not sure that I would identify any of the characters as their actors, but I would definitely, if I'd seen the movie, I have seen the movie, but like I definitely, recognize it as being from The Quick and the Dead.
Yeah. The phrase is still turning up in popular culture. Quick and the Dead by Chaotic Resemblance is from their album Nazarites, released in 2022. Here, the quick and the dead refers to the living and the dead in the context of final judgment. Here's a short bit from the chorus. Quote, the end of all is at hand. Be ye sober, my friend. Are you baptized in red? The king is ready to judge the quick and the dead. End quote. That's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It is poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, how do you discover new to you podcasts? It turns out everyone seems to get their podcasts in different ways. Word of mouth, either through people you know or genuine recommendations from podcasters, are common among our patrons, as well as crossovers or guests on an existing pod feed. There are even several who listen to something new based on their podcast app recommendations. Jan said, quote, I don't remember how I found Bunny Trails, but I'm glad I did. I've had friends recommend some good ones. I've found some just by browsing in keyword searches, and a few pop up as recommendations. Gastropod is pretty high on my list of newer finds, end quote.
Jill said, quote, mentions in articles I read in Substack and newspapers, end quote. And JGP shared, quote, I probably most often find new ones due to guest appearances. especially when it's one of those celebrate an X number of episodes, when a whole bunch of podcasts with similar themes do little bits, and I'll just open up my podcast app and check out each one as they're introduced. I'm pretty sure that's how I found Bunny Trails, from a little spot you did back when Lexitexture celebrated its 100th episode. End quote. That's pretty cool, actually.
That is neat. Yeah, that's fun. That's how you found us, JGP. I love it.
Yeah, I think I found several new shows from that episode as well. It was fun, and it's also the way I typically find new podcasts to listen to as well. It's a great method if you listen to things that might be a tad more niche, you know.
Yeah, most of my podcasts these days come from word of mouth. Many come from people who know me, like people I see in my day-to-day lives, or people who have similar tastes, like people who are patrons of shows that I'm also a patron of, or patrons from our shows. There are also a few that come in from podcasters who recommend the shows they listen to on a regular basis. I think, the word of mouth side of that versus the advertising side is important, because if it's an advertisement, I immediately just like kind of discount it in my head, even if it is a genuine recommendation. But when it's someone who recommends something and they're like, not a sponsor, like to me, that's more, they're not being paid to say anything about that. They're just saying, hey, I love this show, like we do with Sandman Stories Presents, right? So I'm just like, I love that show. I'm not being paid to say that. I think that's a great show.
It's just a good show.
Yeah. So yeah, it's exactly like that. So I think a lot of people, or at least for me, I find a lot of my podcasts from that kind of a thing with podcasts. Now, I got to be honest with you. Probably half the ones that someone says on a podcast, I go check out and don't like, and so I don't listen to any more of it, or I don't even finish the first episode. But the other half, I'll listen to either episodes that sound cool, or some of them I even listen to every episode. So yeah, I think it's really neat. I think word of mouth is still the best way for people to share podcast with others. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember, words belong to their users.